Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede. Pam Bondi has had a rocky tenure as Donald Trump's Attorney General. There was the cabinet meeting where she was so eager to praise Trump that she said this.
Since you have been in office, President Trump, your DOJ agencies have seized more than 22 million fentanyl pills, 3,400 kilos of fentanyl since you've been your last 100 days, which saved, are you ready for this, media, 258 million lives.
Remember, there are only 340 million people in the United States, so according to Bondi, if it wasn't for Donald Trump, 3/4 of the U.S. population would have died by now. She's also been widely seen to have mishandled the Epstein case. First, there were the binders of documents that contained nothing new, and then there was the client list on her desk that never materialized, all of which have only fueled the conspiracy theories engulfing the president. But there are also policy decisions she has made that don't get nearly enough attention. And across South Florida, around the White House, are these mobile billboards attacking Bondi for making gun safety laws weaker. The billboards are part of a campaign by March for Our Lives, the group that rose out of the mass shooting in Parkland in 2018. This week, I spoke to one of the founders of March for Our Lives and its executive director, Jaclyn Corin, who was a student at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High on the day of that tragic event.
Pam Bondi represents a unique and deeply personal betrayal to both me and the Parkland community at large. She was actually the very first official I met after the shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, where I was a junior at the time of the shooting. And at a time when our pain was still very raw, she presented herself as a champion of our cause. Behind closed doors, she talked about school safety and didn't get to the core of the issue, which is the gun. And so that was very frustrating to me and revealed that this would be an uphill battle to get people to actually take the fight for gun safety seriously. But out in the open, she supported red flag laws. She supported, raising the age to buy a firearm from 18 to 21 in the state of Florida. She supported all the things back then because it was politically convenient for her. And now she's Attorney General of the United States. She has a lot of power, and she has done so much to strip back all of the progress the gun violence prevention movement has brought forth over the last few years, including supporting budget cuts to the ATF, including creating a Second Amendment task force that isn't actually about upholding constitutional rights, but rather just upholding the profit-making values of the gun lobby. She has completely stripped back community-based violence intervention funding, which are proven to protect lives, save lives, and actually support direct service work of community members to prevent violence before it happens. And she's also completely destroyed the ATF's zero tolerance policy for rogue gun dealers who repeatedly break the law and supply weapons used in crimes.
You said you feel this as a personal betrayal. Did you really have confidence, though, that she would, as Attorney General, follow through on some of the things that she said she supported in Florida?
Well, as Florida Attorney General, she built her political career off of being the one to promise finding common ground on the issue about guns. That was something that propelled her career forward. So in some ways, I expected some sort of willingness to work with the gun violence prevention movement on figuring out what the best way forward is. But not only has she completely been a hypocrite and not fulfilled any of the promises that she made to Parkland families 7 years ago, she has completely ignored our requests to meet with her, and she's just doing exactly what the gun lobby wants her to do. She is completely a puppet, and so that's why we're holding her accountable, to remind her what she said 7 years ago and remind her and the country that those words should matter.
It's fascinating because, watching March for Our Lives grow out of that tragedy and empowering young people, I want to talk to you about the organization. Now that you're the executive director, you were one of the co-founders, you've now, is an executive director. But before I even go there, I sort of want to talk about the spirit of young people, because one of the things that we saw in this last presidential election with the election of Donald Trump was young people going to him in numbers that we had never seen before. I'm curious as to where all that energy went, that you saw young people on the issue of guns turning out and trying to exert political power, to then seeing so many young people now voting for Donald Trump. How do you make sense of what you saw in this last election?
Yeah, well, first of all, back in 2018 and 2019, gun violence prevention was a top political and social issue for young people. And I am aiming to make that the case again as executive director of March for Our Lives. It should be a top political and social issue for young people because it is the leading cause of death for children in this country. The leading cause of death, beyond car accidents, beyond cancer, beyond anything. Guns are killing our kids the most, and we have to stop that. And so it's devastating to see young people voting for Donald Trump, who is so obviously opposed to any sort of common sense gun regulation. And that's why March for Our Lives is here to educate young people. Hey, people like Attorney General Pam Bondi, people like Trump, people like everyone in his administration are not here to support your life. They are here to support their pockets. So we're going to be hosting a whole bunch of educational and accountability campaigns to reveal the truth behind this crisis. And the reality is, it's not even all that political. It shouldn't be. These are lives, and we are just trying to push for common sense gun regulation to make sure we can have kids go to school and not fear for their lives every single day.
When we come back, we have seen cities and counties across Florida pressured to sign agreements to work with ICE. In a moment, we'll talk to one mayor who is pushing back. Stay with us. Welcome back. For months, Governor Ron DeSantis has been threatening elected officials with removal from office if they do not sign what is known as a 287G agreement, which allows ICE to take control of local police departments to conduct immigration raids. South Miami Mayor Javier Fernandez has challenged the governor, and I had a chance to speak to him this week.
The AG and the governor have been embarked on this campaign of coercion, really, to try to force jurisdictions to sign these supposedly voluntary agreements. And so in their communications, they've reiterated that there's a state mandate essentially to do this, but that, in our opinion, seemed to fly in the face of the actual law. So what we did was we asked the court to clarify for us what the law requires. Are we required as a jurisdiction to sign a 287G agreement in order not to violate the state sanctuary policies? That's essentially the question for the court.
In other words, something can't be both voluntary and mandatory at the same time. And so if it's mandatory, then, you obviously know the path that you have to take, and you'll do that. If it's voluntary, then it's worth having your council make a decision, your commission make a decision as to whether or not you want to enter into a voluntary agreement. But the way yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and my hope is to avoid what's happened in Fort Myers and in Key West in large measure, where cities are forced under coercive conditions to make a policy determination. I mean, the perversity of what happened in Key West is that their police chief signed an agreement without authorization. The only thing the Key West Commission did was void that agreement because it was not done with any authority in law. So they could have a conversation about what they wanted to do next. And as soon as that happened, you saw the reaction on the part of the governor and his attorney general. And under those conditions where they were being threatened with removal from office, they essentially capitulated and signed an agreement that I believe strongly is not required. And the best evidence that we have is what the governor asked of the state legislature in that special session and what they actually adopted, which was not his proposal. His original proposal, Jim, as you may remember, was to require any jurisdiction with more than 25 officers to assign 10% of their officers to support immigration enforcement in this manner. That was never adopted. And so the language, we believe, is very clear. We're not required to do these things. Our hope is that the court will affirm our reading so that other cities, and even us, can have a conversation without the duress or coercion and make a decision about how we want to support these efforts, if at all.
So let's assume that it is voluntary, that the courts side with you. What do you envision happening? What would your position be? Do you want to proceed with signing these 287G agreements with the state, with the federal government, with ICE? How do you intend to proceed if it is in fact voluntary?
Look, Jim, I think I started this conversation just reading the agreement, and the agreement is full of holes for cities. We're going to expand our mission to help the federal government accomplish whatever its goals are with respect to immigration enforcement. But we get no protection. We get no indemnification from claims brought by third parties who may be illegally detained. And we've seen over the last few months just how haphazardly the administration has conducted its deportation program. I don't want to buy my city that kind of liability. I don't see the virtue in doing this. And I think there are other very fundamental questions about the nature of our local law enforcement that could be impacted by our involvement in these kinds of efforts. Cops can be good guys. For the most part, in my community, we love our police force. They're one of the reasons we exist, probably the highest rated service we have. And that's because our officers are seen as our protectors, the stewards of justice here in our community. And my concern is, unfortunately, this is no aspersion on the good men and women that may be working at ICE. Their role is one of confrontation and conflict. They're never coming to deliver good news. It's typically an extraction exercise from someone in a neighborhood. That really, if our officers are involved in that work, it really changes the nature and the perception of who they are and what they're about in our community. And I think that's a conversation we should have about whether these kind of efforts reinforce the basic community trust that's essential to community policing efforts here in Miami-Dade County and in South Miami specifically.
Well, what kind of a leader is it who has to lead through bullying, through threats, through intimidation? If the argument is so compelling, you would think that the governor and others would be able to make the compelling argument, as opposed to threatening and basically extorting municipal leaders such as yourself to comply with their will.
Jim, look, I think Sheriff Tony and Broward said it best. We are all about getting bad guys off the street. We are concerned that for many years, our state attorney's office has been under-resourced in terms of having the prosecutors to prosecute the people that were picked up. So we're glad to see that there were some gains made this session in increasing salaries. We want bad people off the streets. We are concerned first and foremost with funding our police and making sure that our community is safe and secure, because from there springs prosperity. So that's at the heart of our mission, whether you're here legally or illegally. If you're doing something wrong in South Miami, or I venture to say any other city in our great county, most jurisdictions, if not all, are taking efforts to have you removed and have you prosecuted in accordance with the law. I don't understand why we're expending, a ton of state resources. To me, it's appalling that we're spending $450 million on a detention center in the Everglades to house 1,000 people, only 6 of which are criminals. That's more money, Jim, than the state spends on affordable housing, and we are in the middle of an affordable housing crisis today, right? So it just speaks to me of misaligned priorities, and priorities that they're advancing that are self-serving politically, not advancing the interests of our state and our communities.
When we come back, we will talk to the Democratic candidate for State Attorney General. Stay with us. Welcome back. Former State Senator Jose Javier Rodriguez is running for State Attorney General. I caught up with him this week to talk about his campaign.
Well, listen, I'm running for Attorney General because we need somebody in the office of Attorney General who puts the people over the powerful. You're supposed to be the people's lawyer when you serve as Attorney General. We haven't had one in decades. As Attorney General, I would focus on keeping us safe, right? Keeping our kids safe, tackling the opioid crisis. I would focus on the affordability crisis. I would use the powers of the Office of Attorney General to, for example, give property owners and homeowners relief when it comes to our property insurance costs, when it comes to the never-ending rate hikes coming out of Tallahassee. And I would focus on corruption. My entire career as a lawyer has been fighting for the little guy, right? Fighting for workers who got cheated out of their wages or homeowners being exploited, fighting the powerful and corrupt whenever I needed to. And that was my legislative service as well. I was the one going after the biggest and most powerful interests in the state when they were taking advantage of people, when they were taking advantage of taxpayers, and trying to make us pay more for our bills. And I think, when I talk about corruption, when I talk about economic issues, a lot of people say, well, they look at the Attorney General's office and they're not entirely sure what the Attorney General is supposed to be doing. And I say that's because we haven't had a real Attorney General for decades here. The current Attorney General is probably the most corrupt of a string of corrupt Attorney Generals we've had. And he is absolutely the least independent Attorney General we've had. And you need an independent Attorney General to look after the interests of the people of Florida. We haven't had that.
Let me jump in here. I want to get to more of that, but you said something almost at the outset, talking about property insurance and the role that the Attorney General can play. I'm not clear as to what exactly authority the Attorney General would have to change or alter property insurance rates.
That's because you've lived in Florida. Again, like I say, in the last couple of decades, we have not had an Attorney General who has used the power of the office the way that it's supposed to be. You have investigatory power. You have the power to bring lawsuits. In other states, it is not uncommon for Attorney Generals to bring actions against insurance companies, right? To conduct investigations on how their constituents and the people in their state are being treated. We do not have that here, right? So there's a series of questions we would start with. How is it the CEOs can make $50 million and yet they don't have enough money to pay for claims once storms come through, right? So the investigatory power, the lawsuits, and if that's I hear this from people all the time. They hear me talk about economic issues and the affordability crisis as a candidate for Attorney General, and they sort of scratch their heads. And the reason they scratch their heads is because we have not had an Attorney General who will use the power of the office for the people and not the powerful. The insurance companies get whatever they want in Tallahassee, right? I mean, that's the reality. And that needs to change. If I'm Attorney General, it will change.
One of Uthmeier's projects that he and the governor did is Alligator Alcatraz. I'm curious, as Attorney General, what, if anything, you could do about Alligator Alcatraz and what your views overall are about their use of emergency powers to create that detention center out in the Everglades.
Well, I appreciate you asking it. So there's the how they've done it and what they're doing. I think the what they're doing, we could talk about the conditions. We could talk about the use of cruelty as immigration policy, but you're hitting on the how they're doing it. And you mentioned this claim of emergency powers. It's a claim that fits barely on one page from 2023. And they're using this claim of emergency powers to seize land from local government, plan this in secret, and go around the legislature to get their hands on $450 million, which is mostly money that's supposed to be for emergency preparedness and to help us recover after storms. The other piece of the emergency powers that they're using is it allows them to do no bid contracts. And I and others were saying, well, we know what's going to happen here, right? It's the contributors to the campaigns of DeSantis and Uthmeier's friends that are going to get the contracts. And it only took a couple days for intrepid reporters to follow the money and make that case. I think when you look at it, it's really an abuse of power in terms of how they've done it. And when I mentioned the conditions issues that keep coming out in terms of the people at this jail in the Everglades not having access to legal counsel, having trouble reaching their families, with the weather, with the cages, it's terrible. And I think for us in Florida, we're paying the costs in multiple ways, right? The way that they're doing this, the community members that we know that are there, family members who are wondering, you know, the overwhelming majority of those at that facility do not have any criminal violent past, right? They told us that that's what they were going to focus on. And that's not at all what they've been focusing on. That's what's been coming out. But from the perspective of taxpayers and those who, you know, frankly, want checks and balances here in Florida, it is an absolute abuse of power, what they're doing. And I think the other piece to it is Department of Homeland Security has not committed to reimbursing the state of Florida for this, right? So they've signed us on to almost $500 million a year of a project that frankly is putting law enforcement in a really difficult position, right? Because of the conditions there. And it's harming our communities as well.
I think it might be helpful for people to better understand your history, that when you talk about, you know, going after special interests and then having them turn around against you, to talk, you know, perhaps talk a little bit about what you saw and what you experienced in that state Senate race, that you ended up losing by a handful of votes, and that it became clear there were ghost candidates running that race, and that powerful interest, primarily, I believe, Florida Power and Light, financing efforts against you. What did you draw, you know, what was that experience like, and what did you draw from that? What conclusions did you come to following what happened in that case?
Well, thank you for asking. So in 2020, Republican operatives, and we later learned FPL, ran a scheme to try to confuse voters with a ghost candidate. You know, I want to commend the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office for doing a fantastic job with the prosecution of those who were responsible. But I think, you know, I was the target of that, right? I was not. I wouldn't consider myself a victim, right? The victims were the voters who deserve elections without these kind of tricks. But the reason why I was the target for FPL and, you know, others is that nobody else in state government was standing up to FPL like I was when it came to what they were doing to their customers, right? All of us being forced customers, whenever, you know. And I'll just make a note: if you want to know what I'm talking about, FPL is asking Tallahassee for a $1.5 billion rate hike, right? For all of us are forced customers, 14% more on our bills on average. And Tallahassee's, you know, just no resistance whatsoever, right? So they wanted me gone. The then CEO wrote an email to his political people that, you know, came out later publicly that he said that they wanted to make my life a living hell because I was pursuing legislation that had broad appeal to try to open up and have more competition when it came to solar energy, right? Particularly for businesses that wanted to use solar energy on their properties. So, you know, what I've learned from it, frankly, is that that's exactly the type of approach we need from Attorney General, right? Who is not afraid to continue fighting them. You know, the fact that they did this, that doesn't make me afraid, right? That motivates me even more. And it's not personal, right? But that motivates me more, you know, to ask the voters to send me to Tallahassee to root out that type of corruption and those type of corrupt practices. Floridians deserve better.
That should be an interesting race. Well, that's all the time we have today. If you have any thoughts or comments, feel free to contact me at jdefede@cbs.com. I do enjoy hearing from you. Thanks again for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.